Welcome back to the City Current Radio Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're honored to be with our next guest. We dive into the world of news, good news, storytelling. We're here with Ryan Poe. He's a columnist and storyteller with the Commercial Appeal. Ryan, how are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start actually with a little bit of your story, because for those who don't know you, you're a native Memphian, graduate of University of Memphis. So let's start there, because I think it's cool to see your passion for Memphis. So give us a little bit of your storyline personally.
Yeah, so I grew up in Raleigh, right next to Craigmont High School. Grew up playing in that little creek, the little drainage creek that runs all the way to Wolf River, right there under Yates. Born and raised in Memphis, longtime resident here. Went to the University of Memphis, which is my father's alma mater as well. So yeah, just deep roots in Memphis. After college, interned at the Commercial Appeal, and then moved away for 5 years, roughly. That was during the height of the newspaper layoff. So had to take the jobs where I could find them, and then came back home in 2015, I believe it was. Actually, it was 2013, I guess, 2014. Sorry, and then we went to work for the Memphis Business Journal, and then back to the Commercial Appeal. So I've been there since.
And you started out on your end covering politics, government. Share a little bit of kind of diving into that world, and then let's talk about the 901 and kind of the evolution of where you're headed, which is really exciting. So talk about kind of where you started with government and politics, and then we'll talk about kind of where you're headed.
Yeah. So when I went to work for the Commercial Appeal, I was that was my role. Was I was the City Hall reporter, and covered Mayor Wharton's administration, Mayor A.C. Wharton. And then that transition to Mayor Jim Strickland. I've been around government and around the political side of the coverage for a long time. And then 2.5 years ago, I made the transition to the 901 column, which had been previously penned by Chris Harrington. And so I took over that, and that's just kind of a daily column about everything Memphis. Trying to highlight a lot of good stories of Memphis, but especially just Memphis news, very specific, 901, what's happening here. I took that over and have had a great 2.5 years writing it. But then it's just after a while, looking for new challenges and new things, I have taken a step back from it a bit. So now I'm just writing it 1 day a week. And the other days of the week, I'm writing what we're calling the storytelling beat. And that is where I just tell the stories of local Memphians. So it's kind of, instead of doing the 901 column was kind of an aggregation of what's happening. Now I'm also telling the stories about the people behind the scenes who are making things happen, which is really exciting for me as a Memphian.
Absolutely. And I think that's an important kind of storyline in and of itself, is one, understanding your heart for Memphis growing up here, but then also two, now being able to really dive in deeper to share these human interest, personal stories of those who are creating the change, the impact they're having, the lessons they're learning. And so talk a little about, because you've already obviously started on this path, and we'll talk about some of the recent ones, but talk about what you're hoping to accomplish with this.
Yeah, I think maybe the best way to talk about that is to point to a few of the stories that we've done. One was about a man who has kind of taken Geisman Park under his wing. So we did, and not only he, but also other people who have adopted local parks, and we wrote a story about just what that has meant for the park, how it's changed things, not only at Geisman, but also at parks across the city. I think there's 40-something parks that have been adopted, and everyone we talked to said that when people came in and started taking care of their parks, taking care of Memphis, that they saw this astounding change in the community, and people just, being more careful about picking up trash, taking care of their neighborhoods, and looking out for each other too, which has led to decreased crime in these areas where parks have been adopted. So that kind of story is, for me, it kind of encapsulates what I want to do, which is tell the stories of Memphians, but also tell stories that make Memphis better. And so ways of doing that, especially with poverty going forward, I think that's going to be a big focus of ours, to try to uncover just ways that Memphians can respond to the epidemic of poverty, which as everyone in Memphis knows is a huge issue here. So yeah, those kind of things. Right now, what we're working on is this food waste series, which is also, I think, a good example of what we want to do. It's about looking at the amount of food that is going to waste fills, which I forget the exact number, but it would fill like 5,000 FedEx airplanes, 777s. It's a huge amount of food waste that's going to landfills. And what happens when it does go to landfills is it creates this methane gas that is emitted into the air, to the atmosphere, and creates this warming of the environment. So there are environmental reasons, but what especially interests me about this story is that all of this waste that is happening at a time when Memphis and Memphians could use that food in a way like never before, right? And so it's kind of there's two angles to that story. One is the environment, but the other is also people. There are people who need food, and so we're kind of tracing that issue and looking at how it affects the environment, but also how people are trying to rescue the food and take it to those people who could really, really use it right now, especially during the pandemic. So those are two examples.
Yeah, and a few questions on that one from a journalist side, from a storyteller side. I have some questions on that, because I think you bring up a lot of interesting pieces let's start here. One is, how do you decide, because with any of these, it's a complex issue. How do you decide when the story is enough to be told? And obviously it's going to be an ongoing series, but it's like, that's a hard thing when you have so many people to talk to, so many different inputs to bring in, so many complexities to the story. How do you decide when enough is enough to kind of go ahead and put it out there, knowing that, just like anything, it's not a complete story, it's a fairly complete story? Walk us through that process mentally.
Yeah, that's a very good question. How we do that or how I do that would be to take just make a list, make a mental note of everyone who I think should be in that story, and then talk to all of those people, get their opinions, and then from those opinions, kind of write around that story in a way that showcases both the people involved, what they think about the issue, and also the issue, itself. So just trying to figure out how to put those pieces together. It's very like a puzzle, where the reporting is, you get the pieces together and then you start putting it together. And then if you do not have the reporting done adequately, very soon you'll find out at the front end that you're missing pieces, and then you go back and fill those in. So it's kind of an organic process. It's kind of hard to explain. There's not a step-by-step thing that I do, but that's generally how it goes when I start a story.
And all of that with a deadline, of course, too. So you have to do all that on a deadline. Share a little bit of just, to your point of taking in all these different sides, and each side has their own opinion and obviously facts behind that. So how do you kind of marry the different vantage points to be balanced? Because I think that's something you always hear with reporting in general is, we need it to be balanced. We want it to be balanced. We want to remove the politics out of it. How do you go about that side of making sure that you're telling the story from a balanced perspective?
Well, yeah, I think that's just about finding people who have those alternate viewpoints and including them, and trying to be respectful as you're doing it to everyone involved. So I think, when people say, fair reporting, really what that boils down to for me is just being respectful of people and their viewpoints. And so, I try to do that with all stories, whatever I'm doing, not as much in this storytelling beat that I'm doing now, because, obviously there's not really alternate views to something like homelessness. Everyone wants to see homelessness eradicated, but yeah, that's I think being respectful is really what it boils down to. And I should mention our newsroom, our reporters who are covering politics and that kind of thing, they do an especially good job, I think, of trying to to balance stories and include all viewpoints that are, part of the discussion.
So I know it's a story that you're working on now, but talk about Mother Wit.
So some of your older viewers might remember that way back in the day, I can't remember, but before Steve Harvey, I think, is the one who actually pushed her off the air. Mother Wit was a radio personality on a local soul radio station. And so she has a very interesting story. She came from humble background. She was a homeless herself at one point, came to Memphis, got this job on this radio program, had been, I believe, in prison or jail, and which is where she got her nickname, Mother Wit. But now, years later, she's retired. She moved back to Chicago and has now come back to Memphis. And during the pandemic, she looked around and started realizing that homeless people were not able to go into restaurants to get cups of cold water or food like they used to. A lot of restaurants, especially at the start of the pandemic, were closed completely. Now it's more, some places are not open for people to come inside and things like that. And so she started up this program where she's taking food and water to hundreds of homeless people every couple weeks. And we're going to be profiling her and doing a story on kind of that movement, which is, to me, an example of just what Memphians can do. A Memphian who sees a problem and then responds to it, figures out a solution to it. And so she's feeding hundreds of people just by taking initiative. And I think that's going to be a great story to tell when it's ready.
And I think, coming off of Mother Wit and then also to the food waste stories, there's a big piece of this where you're highlighting what's going on and telling that story. But you're also creating a sense of urgency and a sense of responsibility in the community to say, hey, let's do more of this. So there's a call to action, so to speak, in terms of us taking these stories that you're telling and doing something with them in a good way to be more actively engaged. And I think that's, to me, a big part of sharing the story is then the call to action that's implied for all of us to pick up that torch and be a part of the solution. What would you say on that end in terms of a call to action with these stories?
Yeah, you'll see at the very end of a lot of these stories, there will be a little box about how to get involved. And you saw that especially with the park adoptions story that I already mentioned. Things like that. Anywhere people can get involved, we want people to get involved. And that's a big part of doing this series, is not just so people know what's happening. It's so that people can know what's happening and then get ideas and become involved themselves. And the whole idea is to be bringing Memphis as a city, as a community, taking it up to the next level. So Memphis, I think, just as a native Memphian, I've seen our city grow by leaps and bounds, and the way our attitude, I think, toward our city is so much better than it used to be, even 10, 15 years ago. So I think that, and that's in large part because of there's a kind of a movement, I think, that cityCURRENT is part of, and that we want to be a part of as well, of just trying to take Memphis, encourage Memphians to go beyond themselves, beyond their own situations, and try to think about what is good for Memphis as a whole.
Absolutely. I know you put this out on Twitter, but share how the community can help find these stories, send them to you for consideration. How do we help you tell these stories?
That would be great. We are always looking for stories, good news stories. If you have any, send them to me. My email is poe@commercialappeal.com, POE@commercialappeal.com. And you can find me on Twitter @Ryan Poe. So either place would be great. And I would love to hear from anyone who has a good story for me.
And obviously talk about just how we can help with the commercial appeal. I know subscriptions, that's always a piece of this, supporting local journalism, but talk about where we can go to support the commercial appeal, to subscribe, to find these stories. Where do we go?
Yes, that would be a huge help to us, especially right now. The COVID, like everyone, the commercial appeal has struggled financially during it. And so it would be a great help to I think, to local journalism, for anyone to support their local media. And there are a number of options for that. But to support the commercial appeal, it's very easy. You can Google subscribe to the Commercial Appeal, and it'll pop right up. And we are running a sale actually right now that is, as one of my colleagues said, is a stupid good deal. And I forget exactly how much it is, but it's very, very cheap right now. So please get on there and subscribe if you can, and try to support what we're doing.
Well, you make it easy. I love where this new column and storytelling is headed. I love you and your passion for Memphis, and greatly appreciate all you do. So Ryan Poe, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you much, Jeremy.